it's a pleasure really to have you here with us.
Thank you.
And well, to start, we would like to ask you to introduce yourself a little bit, to tell us a little bit about your background and the things that you are doing with flow management and optimizing the work of the teams.
Great. Well, thank you for having me. My name is Tina Dankwart. I'm a value stream architect, currently work for Tasktop. And in my current role, I work with traditional businesses and really helping them to make some real changes in how they deliver technology. So mostly software. We have hardware elements. We work with banks, automotives as well. So it's the whole combination of it and really helping companies to make some true changes and optimizing how they deliver. I'm particularly passionate about aligning everything to outcomes. You know, there's far too much going on about where we measure things by activities or output. All those are important, of course, but I'm really passionate about getting people to think about, you know, what does success look like? You know, really, what is the outcome that we're aiming for? And that goes into a lot of the work I do on a daily basis.
Okay. Tina, how did you end up doing this?
I used to work for a very large software company, software and hardware for Hewlett Packard. And I built solutions for some of their largest SaaS clients, reporting across the board, across different projects. So I spent 10 years of my life building data lakes and then trying to get the information out. So I experienced firsthand what it is like to be that poor person who has to try and extract some of the information. And then at some point, I used integration, for example, to solve some of those problems, which is kind of Tasktop's foundation, is integrating and bridging those silos that we have in companies. And I just loved the vision of the CEO. And I actually moved there before he wrote his best-selling book, Project to Product. But I just love the vision, and now I love the work atmosphere there as well. So, and that's kind of how I ended up there.
Wow, very nice.
Yeah, we normally start with a question about your first contact with Agile.
Yeah.
How did you react to it? What your feelings about the first impression?
Yeah, so I actually come from a complete waterfall background. I mean, don't we all, in a way? But I went to university when that was still the methodology that was taught. And so it was all about defining requirements and how important it is that we understand that and how we then go from one step to the other. And I then moved into a company that was very much, you know, I supported and then later was a solutions consultant for one of their biggest ALM products, which is very much about waterfall. And so that's sort of my background. And then obviously all this talk started, you know, it should be done differently. And I was intrigued. And I started to understand what our problems were within that company that I was working for, you know, what the problem was there. One, about the silos and about the lack of agility, but also nothing being aligned by product. So that's really interesting. I actually, at that point, thought it's kind of very odd that nobody seems to own the overall thing. We're all in our little bubble. And when we're making decisions, you know, it's really, really difficult to make those decisions. But I'll be really honest with you. My first thought was, there goes our customer base, right? This is going to take off and it doesn't fit with what we do. So either we're going to change here and do something very differently, you know, and we did see that erode the customer base. People were jumping off onto, you know, the Atlassian stack obviously took a lot, and various other products as well started taking the market share because they were much more aligned to that way of working, right? So whereas the traditional ALM products, definitely not so much, right? They base everything on the step-by-step, you know, making it through that waterfall. So the honest answer is I just thought, this does not bode well. But no, I was intrigued by it for sure. So
okay. Wow. So your methodology has evolved, yes, in the same way that your view of managing all this has evolved too.
It definitely has. So for one I now see it as absolutely essential, Agile and DevOps. And I also think it's not enough, right? It's not just the Agile transformations, everything is not enough. We need to start to pay attention to flow. We need to measure the right things, right? Now there's my outcome topic again, really, but we also need to measure flow in order to optimize, to deliver faster, better software and technology. So that's a big thing. We need to know whether the Agile transformation is successful. We see so much of this rebranding exercise, right? And by the way, when we're talking value stream management, which is kind of the thing that you add on to that, it's the same thing. People just go and take something, they take a team and say, you're now a value stream, but we're changing absolutely nothing, right? We're not changing it. And it's everywhere. You get this with the Agile thing as well. You either have, let's just have some, some agility, maybe. Let's celebrate that everybody now works in Jira, right? Yay. But the most common thing we actually see is that people think they're Agile, right? And they're really not. You get this little scrum sandwich, is what I like to call it. So you have the dev team and they're really Agile. But then the overall thing is run by there's an 18-month funding model. I'm going to decide now what we're going to build in 18 months' time. Well, that is not Agile, right? And so there are companies that know they're not Agile and they admit to it and they think, oh, we're so far behind, right? But then there are the ones that actually think they're really Agile and give themselves a pat on the back. And when you look at it, it's a watermelon. On the outside looks green, on the inside completely red, not Agile at all. Because on the one side, you have your funding model maybe, and on the other side, the release management. Really common thing there where, because of the funding model as well, you have these huge chunks of work that have to be completed before the customer can have it in their hands, right? And so you optimize the building of it and maybe the testing and everything, but then you have to wait for all this other stuff to finish, exactly. Before you get anything. And this is a really important part of this whole measuring end to end, right? If we just optimize the little bit in the middle, we achieve nothing at all, right? So really important. And then, of course, the whole thing of what does success look like? Let's make sure that we align it to that. And that's the bit that we need to add on to Agile transformation. Otherwise, we find, that we don't even know whether we're getting anywhere or not. Exactly. We're doing the routines, we're calling everybody Scrum Masters, but actually, have we changed something? And if so, how do we know? What are we aiming for, and how do we know that we're getting there?
But for example, in our case, that we go and talk to banks or insurance companies as our customers here at Netmind, and we are still seeing the managers in general terms trying to always optimize the resource utilization. Make sure that everybody is extremely busy. So what are your tips when we have to move the discussion more in the way or in the direction of optimizing the flow of work, the thing that you are saying? So
I would say the two are completely linked, right? So how am I going to optimize and utilize it perfectly if I don't measure end to end, for example? So I'll give an example on that one. Is we work with a large insurance company, American insurance company, and they knew they took 120 days end to end to deliver something, but they didn't know exactly, where the work was at any point. And what they were doing is they were throwing developers at the problem, right? Surely, if I throw lots of developers, hire loads of them, and we see this everywhere, by the way, hire lots of developers, that will surely solve our problem. Well, when we actually dug into where is the work getting stuck, they realized that dev took 2.5 days out of 120. Now, you could optimize that out of your value stream completely, and you've made no difference at all. So it is so important that, when we want to optimize our resources, that we start caring about flow so that we can put the right people in the right place to really, and again, I'm going to get back to the outcomes, but what is it that we want to achieve? Okay, we want to be faster. We want to make sure everybody's busy and working on the right things. But ultimately, that's what we need to focus on. And if that is what we want, we need to know where's the bottleneck and then put the right people in place there. And it's just so important on that one. Okay. So you can't really talk about the other.
You are talking a lot about flow efficiency. So what is your definition of flow efficiency? And most importantly, how can we measure it? Because measuring efficiency is not that
difficult.
Obvious, not that, it's
difficult. And great question.
Probably for that.
No, it's a great question. So first of all, let's think about flow time, because the two are linked, of course. So when we're talking end to end, we need to understand, first of all, how long does something take to get through my value stream, right? And the beginning is when the customer's asking. The clock starts ticking when the customer asks for it. It's not when it makes it into the backlog. It's not when the developers have finished it and it's job done sort of thing. It is really when the customer has it in their hand. So we need to think about this truly end to end. And then efficiency is really of that time. How much of the time is it waiting and how much is it actively being worked on? So all wait is waste, right? Always, no exception. And so if we want to become cheaper, drop costs, your resource utilization, optimizing, getting faster, and so on, all those things, we want to cut out the waste. So we need to measure it, but it's not that simple. So usually what people think is, okay, flow efficiency, yeah, I have a blocked state in Jira, right? Great. So I can tell you exactly, how much time it's stuck. It's unfortunately, the blocked status has two major issues with it. The first one is it is not very granular. It doesn't actually tell me where stuff is getting stuck. So it could be waiting for testing, waiting for dev, waiting for some sort of approval. So that's the first thing. So obviously, ideally, you would want far more granular states in terms of that. But the bigger issue is actually when you look at states, done is my favorite state because done could be anything, right? Done is the most common wait state that you will find, right? And the most overlooked. So when I'm thinking, the really important thing is we need to make that stuff visible, right? And it's not easy, but it's so important that we consider, and it's not the same for every team, right? So there is not one size fits all. So me, the poor engineer who had to go and try and get something out of a data lake, it's really hard to do because you need to be able to model it depending on how that team works. So done for one team might actually mean the customer has it in their hand. That's it. It's actually done. And I keep hearing people referring to it's done, and it's actually done. Right? And of course, we can't just go and align everything in Jira or Azure DevOps or whichever tools we're using because, all the teams work differently and that's really important. Agile, power to the teams and all that is really important. So we need to find ways in making visible what is actually going on as opposed to what we think is going on. The other state that is hardly ever accurate is work in progress. Is it? Or are we actually waiting on something? So there are other ways we can look at that. We can say, okay, work in progress assigned to testing team, then maybe they're actually waiting on it. Are we waiting for the testers or are they actively doing stuff? So we need to break that down more and more and get a clearer and clearer picture. To begin with, you get a blurry picture of what's going on. And the more you dig into it, the better a view you will get. And that's where you can then really start optimizing and showing the improvement of cutting out all that waste, and it will increase your velocity, as in the amount of things you put through, and hopefully decrease your time to value. So really great question. Thanks.
But in those cases, in order to track all those states that you are mentioning, you need information there. So I guess that the testers or the developers need to actually register the changes somewhere. So how much of that should we ask those people to how much information they should provide there without overloading them with extra work, because they are already busy. They are doing things, but the problem is, as you are saying, the work is not visible.
So that's a great question. And there are two answers to that. So any improvement takes effort, right? So there will be, the gains will massively outweigh. And the important bit there is we need to consider why. Why are we doing this at all, right? People don't like putting things properly into Jira because they see no return on it, right? Why? It's just some stupid admin thing. Well, now, if this gets to, it's true, right? It's just how we've all been there. So, start tracking your time. I mean, it's everybody's worst nightmare, right? So first of all, we need to create a really compelling why, because in the end, change happens in the teams. And if they want something to change, well, once you start making it visible, if they see that they can actually make changes to their bigger headaches, like I'm constantly waiting for testing, or I'm totally overloaded all the time, or I just can't get around to the real stuff I want to do because I'm constantly distracted by all this other incoming stuff. Once you get that and you get the real why, then there is an answer to, to them, okay, well, now I see a point of putting that in there because I can use that data to make a strong business case to have something changed. The other option, of course, there are tools available in the market that can help you with that, right?
Okay.
You want to model that. But the big thing is, and I think it's really important to set the right expectations on these transformations, there is some work involved. You want to, like, even in tools, you need to model it because obviously every team works differently. If you want to give a clear picture of what's going on, we do need that effort. And so it's really up to the coaches and everybody to really create that environment to motivate people, to help people understand why, why are we doing this? What's in it for me? And it's really critical in all of the work around that.
The benefits and the value that you get out of it. Okay. So I don't know, Alonso, if you have any question.
Many. For example, something about the major degree impediments you have find about the flow, or how to identify and try to mitigate this kind of impediments in a company, for example.
Okay.
It's a question just to start.
Yeah. So what do we do about the impediments, right? And unfortunately, there is no one size fits all answer, right? There are so many different things. I guess when we start to measure, we come across, lots of different things that could be. And the most common one that we find, actually, and I'll use that as an example, is the work in progress, right? Too much work in progress. That is the big one that you will see across the board everywhere, right? And so to answer that question, I mean, maybe first we'll go in a little bit in a moment, maybe as to why is work in progress a problem, right? Because first of all, overloaded teams, employee happiness will plummet immediately, right? Like it's the biggest killer of employee happiness and the highest driver of staff turnover, right? Whether they go off sick, by the way, it's a great measure, right? Burning people out, you will see that I've seen companies use that as a measure to see what are the sick days doing. Because if we overload them and they're unhappy, people go off more often. It's just a side, but also they change jobs. So employee happiness, critically important. Unhappy people, not as efficient. Second bit, velocity directly impacted on, when you overload the teams, the velocity will drop. It's context switching, but you can even see it on a motorway. The more stuff I stuff onto the more cars I put on the motorway, the less stuff will get through. We ran an experiment. We took 10% of load of a team. We got a 600% increase in productivity. It's incredible the difference it makes, right? So really important. And finally, they are the unstable system. And what it means, if we're thinking of that motorway, is I can't predict at all how long it's going to take a car to get through the system, right? So I can't tell you what's happening with that in terms of the average time. And if I can't do that, I can't predict, when it comes to, our resource allocation, when it comes to predicting when something's going to go live, I'm not going to be able to do that. Or worse, I might be patting myself on the back because things are getting faster and I'm only measuring ambulances because they can get through, whereas 80% of my stuff is still on the road. Now, what do we do about that, right? So that was the question. What do we do with that? So I use that as an example just because it is the most important one. People don't realize as to what the big issue is with overloading our teams. So we need to take some of these cars off the road, right? Now, this is where the coaches come in and you need to look at, if at all possible, implement a pull operation, right? Only pull things in when you, and by the way, you'll find there that teams are their own worst enemy because we're always praised for being busy, right? It's the team still doing it, even when we say, stop, but it's like, yeah, but then I'll just sit here idle. What am I going to do? Because I'm waiting for something that, but stop pulling things into the value.
I have to show results.
Exactly. I have to, and it's particularly bad when you're working with contractors, right? Because they're like, oh, I must show that I'm busy, right? Really important. And there are so many, and the Agile manifestos, they give us a lot of advice on this as well as to what you can do. A lot of that is back to my outcomes. What is it we're trying to achieve? Right? And let's go and throw out all the stuff that weren't actually critical let's say no more often to the things that are not critical, right? Let's be really clear on what our outcomes are, and then go and drop the things that don't matter, that aren't relevant. So those are some things, but unfortunately there is no one size fits all, because it depends very much on what we're finding. If we find a bottleneck and we want to optimize flow, it's so dependent on the bottleneck. But the first thing is always, let's start the conversation. Why is it they are? What is the problem? Where, and a lot of the time, the teams they know really well what the problem is. When, once you start asking them and say, they'll be like, yeah, it's that back-end system, or it's that team, they are so overloaded, right? There's no way, we can't get anything through that. What can we do? Let's pull some of the testing into the developers, into development to optimize, because they can't cope. We're waiting for ages. There's so many different optimizations that you can do, but this is really where good coaching comes in to help them, because often you can't, sometimes they know, but, facilitating change is much easier, getting people in from the outside to help identify and make changes. And maybe we can add there as well, a really important factor for creating change is create the environment for change to happen. That psychological safety.
It's safe, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's so critical. What we find so often is, hey, we have all these great insights, brilliant, and now we're going to do something about it, right? We need to be so careful to separate out, there is a problem. You are not the problem is the problem, right? Mm-hmm. Really important bit of the coaching there. So
okay. It's curious that you mentioned this metaphor of the traffic, because there is this simulation from the Deutsche Bahn, from the German government, that is fantastic and very graphic, and how easy it is to create bottlenecks. And when you try to add additional lines, nothing happens, and only reducing WIP, because, well, the number of cars and vehicles is when you start to see some progress.
Absolutely.
It's very graphic. Okay.
And so I think the stability of a system is such an important piece of everything, right? Because the minute we have too much WIP, the whole thing becomes unpredictable. We don't know anymore. Exactly. We can't say when it's going to be done. We can't, we're switching priorities, and that's the other big thing that comes up everywhere. Priorities change all the time, but it is so difficult. And exactly, you're right. Stopping the flow of new cars entering that system that you were referring to there, that simulation, I think, that is the only way, to really improve. And then you can start measuring. And obviously we need to remove the bottlenecks, or the roadworks along the way. But ultimately, the first thing we need to focus on is, do we have a stable system? And only when we have that can we really make a change in the delivery. And it has so many other positive side effects, reducing WIP, so definitely. Okay.
But still, are you still getting, I don't know, some dissenting feedback from people that may not agree with you in this flow optimization fever? Because I think that right now, in the last 2 years, this has become a fever in a way. Or what opposing or contradictory view are you getting related to these flow metrics? Because it is not that easy to implement these changes in big and traditional organizations. So there is probably some resistance, no? So what can you say about that?
So I think the biggest thing that we hear over and over again is, oh no, here we go, another one. Right? Here's another metric they're going to hit me over the head with.
Another recipe.
Exactly. There's another stick they're trying to hit me with. Right? That's the first bit. Very little opposing to the metrics themselves, and much more like, what is the point? It's not going to change anything. Great. We have another metric. We're going to sit there in analysis paralysis. Yay, we have some more insights, but it's going to do exactly nothing. Right? So that is the biggest thing. It's actually, or we're too busy to do anything, right? I'm too late, I can't stop for fuel. So those are the typical things and the opposition to it. And so I think, again, it's really important that we consider, often there's the executive level and they're really excited about it and they want the metrics, but the change happens on the team level. And so we need to really be really clear that, for one, without action, meaningless, absolutely meaningless. If we don't actually do anything with the data, right, then it's a complete waste of time. But more importantly, again, getting back to that psychological safety, we need to get to the point where people don't fear the metrics, but use them to make a strong case for things they want to change. In the end, everybody really normally goes to work because they want to do a good job, right? So it's really important to carve out, well, what are they hoping to get out of it? What are the changes and why? And what we find is once you implement it on a small scale, other people want a slice of the action because things are improving. I mean, nobody hates it if you take 50% of their workload off them and they can finally breathe and they finally understand, okay, I've got this big vision that was painted somewhere on the executive level. How does that even translate to what I'm doing? So I'm not interested. And I'm going to be measured on story points and how many epics we've churned out, but I have no idea actually really what I'm aiming for. And when you change that to, okay, here's what we want to do and why, and let's all think, you know, about how we're going to optimize that, how we're going to make that better, you create that atmosphere of, okay, we want to really take action, and we have to create the safety as well to take action because they are experiments. In the end, you know, it's quite a difficult one to put your head on the line and say, okay, we're going to bring in the testing into development. We're going to try that out and see how it works, because it could fail. So that's why it's important that we have data to back that up. We can say, okay, we have identified a bottleneck here. Now let's come up with some ideas on how we can fix that. And then let's measure whether it has changed. And as you go, you can start addressing some of the bigger things. You're not going to start with a funding model. Nobody will put their head on the line and say, hey, yeah, let's just change the funding model there and then. But when you run small experiments and then widen that out, you get the buy-in from other teams, you get the buy-in to make bigger changes because you will be able to show the impact it's having. So those are definitely the most common. Do nothing, basically. Carry on with the status quo.
Okay. Tina, you were mentioning this idea where it is very difficult to implement these changes. So in those organizations, in your experience, what do you think are the most important or the most evident impediments that you see when the companies have to implement this mindset?
It's definitely the impediments to implementing flow within the
so
company.
maybe it's the leadership themselves that don't get the message, or is the companies that don't have the tools or the means, or I don't know, the teams are not trained.
The infamous middle management. Everyone is blaming the poor middle manager of everything.
That's a really interesting question. So one part is you do need the executive buy-in. Absolutely. Without it, you're not going to get anywhere, because you're not going to be able to remove those obstacles. If we're thinking about the team itself and they implement their changes, they can make changes on their team level. But then if we're thinking about that little slice of my value stream, if I really want to make an impact, there will be bigger impediments that will need to be removed to show a success and to create also the safety and the time, which we spoke about earlier. We need that executive buy-in, and we really do need for them to really also encourage, look, we want to make changes. We want to identify where the problems are, you know, creating that atmosphere. Definitely need that. But also, you know, so that's a big problem. The biggest thing is probably the whole analysis paralysis bit. Everybody's like, yay, great, we're seeing all this stuff. Oh, now we need to actually make a change. Change is hard. Let's be clear, right? Change is hard. And so that is probably one of the biggest impediments to actually implement. Showing metrics is great, and it's not easy. We spoke about that, but really making real changes, it requires everybody to be aligned and to think about, you know, why are we doing this? And we're actually going to spend some time. You know, we need to come up with creative ideas on how we're going to improve flow. And so not taking action is the biggest impediment, I would say, when rolling this out, because getting the metrics, great, we can connect to tools, we can, you know, there's all sorts of ways of getting those insights. But then once we have them, what we're going to do about it. And what you often find is this, especially in the big traditional companies, is that people are just totally resigned to the status quo. that you find they're like, nothing is ever going to change anyway. You know, great. You know, we now know. Now I have the data to back up what I already knew, right? Great. But I just don't believe anything will ever change. It's that sort of situation, and that can be tackled on all sorts of different levels, right? So on the team level, creating that. On the executive level, we need the buy-in across the board, really, and the ones in the middle, of course, as well. So.
And before you were talking about this way of implementing this transformation through a small experiment, I think that you were using that word. So it's a kind of incremental way of approaching this. But then how long does it take, more or less? So are we talking about, I don't know, a couple of months, or I don't know, 10 years, a decade? How long does it take to actually see the benefits in some cases? Hopefully not. One decade.
It really depends on how small or how large you start. So the most common approach is to start it on a fairly small scale. Start it on a couple of value streams that have ideally big problems, right? We don't want one that is
very visible already. Problems,
right? Okay. We want a big tangible problem, and it wants to be visible enough throughout the company to really, you know, be as a beacon, if you like, to show, hey, we can make some real changes here. We've seen in the past, hey, let's use the guys that are already super agile and they're great, and then, but we're not going to be able to show much there. So if we want to affect change, now ideally we want to also start with teams that have an open mind, you know, a growth mindset. That's great if we can have it. If not, you know, that is also fine. But how long does it take is kind of how long is a piece of string. So you would want to show some real changes within those value streams within sort of 4 or 5 months. Okay. You know, you want to get the data together. That should be fairly quick. Then you form your hypotheses, but it's the change bit that takes longer, right? The data and everything and understanding it and getting the insights, that should be, you know, 4 or 6 weeks, something like that. But the really important thing there to really make a change within on the team level, you know, some changes can be implemented very quickly. Other changes take a much longer time. And then you get into this region of dependencies with other teams. And so what happens quite often naturally, you know, we might start with 3, but actually we find that there are dependencies on 3 other teams. So we bring them in as well, because in the end, you know, the value streams are not linear. You know, I've seen there's often this concept of a waterfall value stream, which would be, that's unfortunately not how value streams work. There are interdependencies and so on. And so starting to paint that bigger picture. Now, it is possible to do it on a huge scale, make everything visible and then optimize it. But really the recommended way of doing it is start small, really, you know, make those a success and then show, you know, and then roll it out further and further. Because the other thing is also making a whole value stream visible is not always easy and sometimes not even possible. What you find is as you move to the left side of the value stream, they use PowerPoint. Well, good luck with that one, because you can't actually, well, there's no states in PowerPoint. There's nothing to tell me how long did it stay in this particular state. It's just not there, right? So making work visible, and it's an ongoing process. There's also not a point where we say, hey, and now we're done. Great, perfect. Because of course, once I move a bottleneck, it's going to shift elsewhere, right? I've moved, you know, if I want to optimize it, get smaller and smaller, of course, but my bottleneck is going to start shifting. So value stream management really, and paying attention to flow is an ongoing process, but really we would want to start seeing real measurable changes, you know, within a few months. So,
and someone like you, for example, as a flow architect, so you are kind of your idea here is probably to go with a team, coach the team, help them probably identify the value streams. So do you need to be there all the time with them, or your intervention is something particular and then the teams are expected to be more autonomous?
Definitely the second option. So what is important, so we find that in the initial stages, a lot of coaching is needed. It's really important because often it's a complete mindset change, and we need help to create that, you know, that atmosphere to really get people thinking about and encouraging, and also all these things we spoke about earlier as well. Now what? I've got the insight, how do I change it, right? So you need people that have experience with flow, that have experience with Agile, to come in and help put things in place. but ultimately the idea is to teach people to fish, so that it gets built into the common routines that they have anyway, that flow metrics really just become part of the everyday. We optimize things, we measure it by that, we know what our OKRs are, we know what the desired business outcomes are, and we keep optimizing it and making sure that we don't lose track. And we use that within Tasktop as well. We make sure that we keep measuring ourselves as well, because you learn so much as you go. You never finish learning about the different things that you can put in to optimize things, and what impacts things like employee happiness and these sorts of things as well. So,
okay, wow. I don't know, Alonso, if you have any other question. I have thousands of questions.
yeah. But I think it's time to probably the last 2 questions. No?
The last 10 questions. No.
The last 2 questions. So first of all, I wonder about there is this idea of team topologies, about using this inverted Conway law. So the idea is that, do you remember the Conway law? Because it says that the structure of your company is reflected in the structure in your products. And in team topologies, they say change the structure of your teams in order to reflect the most appropriate architecture for your products. There is something similar. Do you think there is something similar that we can do in order to improve flow? There is a way to arrange the different layers of the organization in order to improve flow?
Yes. So, well, in effect, virtually aligning the teams to by the flow of work is at the foundation of it. And I think the really interesting bit is the question I often get is, do I now need to go away and design all these value streams throughout my company, right? Everything, so that I can align the teams by those. And the most important thing to realize, I think, on that one is value streams exist now. They are there. You don't need to design them, right? They are there because value will be flowing through your company. If not, you've gone out of business a long time ago. If there's no value, right?
Definitely. Right. You're already doing something, yes.
Yeah, exactly, right? So we're doing things. So it's really about uncovering those value streams and virtually aligning them. But again, the really important thing is, let's start by measuring what is now, and let's align and optimize according to what we are finding in the measurements, right? So in our bottlenecks, in where work is getting stuck, when we see interdependencies of teams and all those things, aligning the teams according to that to improve the flow of work. So there is no real design that we can give, because it changes, because it depends on what you're building as well, right? So it's really important that we measure and then we optimize. We were talking earlier there, let's bring testing into development, right? Really prime example. But having product owners, of course, for decision making, all these things are really important. But it's really, really important that we look at those value streams, uncover them. They're there. They're not what a consultant is going to tell you what they are, right? We're not designing them. We're helping you uncover what they are and how they interdepend. And then value streams also are not, products are interlinked, right? So they are not, a value stream is as short and as long as you say it is, effectively, because I can look at little pieces. Like let's think of a car. A car in itself is a value stream, right? But it consists of about 1 million other value streams, right? Because I've got my sat nav, and that's a value stream. Within that, I have maps, and they're a value stream, right? So it's important that we look at all the value streams and their interdependencies, and we can do that with those states we were talking about earlier, looking at, we're waiting for this bit, and these teams hang together, and sometimes we can merge those value streams, but they are a lot less fixed than people think they are, the individual value streams. So that's why I'm saying virtually aligned around the flow of the value, because they are not as fixed as we might think.
Okay. How do you envision the future of agility? Tina, where are we going in a way? Because this idea of value streams, for example, 5 years ago was not here yet. At least not here in the IT transformation, not with the power that it is mentioned nowadays. But do you see some changes already, or something coming in the future?
Well, I think the big thing actually is business agility, right? Aligning business and technology, and let's make sure we're all pulling in the same direction, right? That is the big thing. And value stream management has really it's added on to Agile and DevOps and all of that. It's an addition, it complements it, right? So aligning everybody, making sure we all speak the same language, right? So as in, we know what we're referring to, so we can talk about trade-offs, we can talk about impact, and we're all aligned to business value, right? We get this so often in technology. They're talking about story points, and the business go, "What are you talking about? I'm not interested. Tell me about outcomes. Tell me about." And it's so important that we start getting that right, that we get everybody at the same table, and we know that we're all pulling at the same. Let's move away from the whole cost center, technology as a cost center, a value creation that is in line with the business. And I think that is the big thing, all of that working together, really. Okay,
wow. Thank you so much. So I don't know if you have some final words or something that you want to share with the audience, some tips of advice.
No, I think it's to me, it's the big things. Start measuring, right? And think about what is success really, right? What is the outcome that we're going for here? And that is the real final destination. That's what we need to get so clear on. Let's get away from measuring our success on activities, because ultimately it fails if we stop there. We will not make any change, and let's be courageous and really make changes, because that is the big thing that I think is missing at the moment, that we start measuring things and people get very excited and then they do nothing about it. And at that point, the whole thing is such a waste of time. So I think the big thing is, yes, start measuring. Let's make sure we're all aligned, and then be courageous to actually, take action and change something for the better.
Okay. Wow. Thank you so much for your time, for your very deep and good explanations. It was a pleasure having you here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Tina. Bye.
Great.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.